The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society, and we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings.
President JFK was 100% correct with that statement. Hi, Conrad White from Success Council. JFK's statement is particularly relevant today because the most secretive and powerful institution on earth is in the crosshairs of a full audit by the U.S. government. No, I'm not talking about the CIA, MI5, or Al-Qaeda. I'm talking about the Federal Reserve. And thankfully, I'm not the only one. It's become an incredibly popular topic ever since pioneers like Ron Paul have shown light on the subject. Did you know that the Federal Reserve has been granted a monopoly on printing U.S. dollars and setting the price of borrowing them? Given that U.S. dollars are 50% of every single transaction in the United States and 50% of every exchange of oil, gold, silver, corn, wheat, and just about everything else on the whole planet, it's clearly the most powerful organization on earth. In fact, the founder of the Rothschild family banking dynasty said, "Give me control of a nation's money and I care not who makes its laws." Yikes! What's even scarier is how secretive the Federal Reserve is.
There are a lot of questions that surround the Federal Reserve, but many Americans may not realize this. But right now, no one, not even the president himself, can look at the Federal Reserve's books. It's a private institution that has the single greatest power over our economy. You see, no one actually knows where the Fed's directives come from. The Fed operates independently of the U.S. government. Its decisions do not have to be approved by the president or any branch of government. But the Fed still sets all interest rates, decides how much money to print, buys our debt, and creates inflation, all of it without any oversight from elected leaders. Thus, Audit the Fed, a bill that says the Fed must have some level of transparency and accountability for the decisions it's making.
In fact, Greenspan or Bernanke, with the help of their banker buddies, could create $1 billion and put it in their personal bank account and we would never know. Freaky, huh? Okay, we don't know much about what the Fed is doing, but what do we know?
The Federal Reserve Bank was started in 1913 by an act of Congress, but not really. You see, Congress allowed the creation of the Fed, but the Federal Reserve Act of 1913 wasn't drafted by Congress. It was drafted under great secrecy in a meeting of associates of very powerful men at a place called Jekyll Island. I know, sounds like a movie, right? The men represented at that meeting, J.P. Morgan, William Rockefeller, and the Rothschild banking family. The wealth of the 5 families represented at that meeting represented at the time 1/4 of all the wealth in the world. If you have not read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, you should. It explains in great detail how the Federal Reserve Bank came into existence, and it's a very strange story. Now, I could spend an hour explaining all the details on the history of the Fed, but time won't allow it. So in short, it's critical to understand the objectives of the Federal Reserve. The Fed was drafted with 5 objectives. Number 1, to stop competition from newer banks, especially banks in the western part of the United States. 2, to obtain a franchise to create money out of nothing for the purpose of lending. 3, to get control of all the reserves of other banks so that reckless banks wouldn't be overrun. 4, to shift the losses from the banks to the taxpayers. And 5, to convince Congress that the purpose was to protect the public.
So, 100 years ago, 5 of the wealthiest families in the world got together and decided to share a money printing machine. Then, they gave themselves the right to operate it in complete secrecy. Well, I'm sure they're only using their secret money printing machine for our benefit. No need to worry. So what has been the result? Well, at the time, America had the largest middle class the world had ever known. Today, the middle class has been decimated. The number of people living below the poverty line has exploded. The number of homeless children on the streets is rising faster than the generation who grew up in the Great Depression. And the wealth and power concentrated in the hands of Wall Street is literally beyond the average person's comprehension. But good news, America, and indeed, the world.
H.R. 459, a bill to audit the Fed, has been attempted in just about every session of Congress over the past decade. Yesterday, though, it was overwhelmingly approved by a vote of 327 for, 98 against. Audit the Fed would allow the U.S. Congress to audit the lending activities and the printing of money conducted by the Federal Reserve. Do you know how much money the Fed is printing? Why, during the 2008 financial crisis, did the Federal Reserve refuse to give money to investment bank Lehman Brothers before their collapse, but then after they collapsed made a $138 billion loan? Why? Why does the Fed print American money and then lend it to foreign banks? During the height of the 2008 crisis, 70% of bailout money went to banks overseas. Why is that?
Hip, hip, hooray! Thanks to the internet and videos just like this, finally enough members of the public have put enough pressure on Congress to find out the truth about where the wealthiest people on the planet send your money. But not so fast. If you had a secretive money printing machine and had stolen trillions of dollars from the American people, would you have perhaps spent some of that money on insurance to make sure no one ever found out? Would you have perhaps spent that money buying up and consolidating mainstream media outlets, or perhaps just buy their favors? You will recall that the Rockefeller family was one of those 5 families represented on Jekyll Island.
At a 1991 closed-door meeting of fellow internationalists, billionaire and former CFR chairman David Rockefeller praised his media allies. But his confidence that his words would not leave the room was later broken.
We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications whose directors have attended our meetings and restricted their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity.
So what exactly has his friends in the mainstream media done to help this little crisis for Mr. Rockefeller? Well, before I answer that, let me say the Audit the Fed bill is only 1 page, and you can read it at the link below if you like. The bill simply asks for a one-time audit of the Fed to discover why and where the money created by the Fed has gone in the past. There's nothing in it about Congress taking over the role of the Fed, being involved in any future decisions, or having any authority over the Fed. Just tell us where they spent our money. So with that in mind, let's look at what the mainstream media has cooked up.
And forgive me for this, but I think the last thing in the world anybody wants to see is Congress involved in monetary policy. You guys can't pass a budget. $15 trillion worth of debt, most at the hands of Congress. Why should we give you the financial reins here? Like, if you guys had the printing presses, those presses would never stop. They would go 24 hours a day.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Yeah, do you think auditing the Fed makes sense? I mean, to me, that seems like maybe you're putting more cooks in the kitchen. Who does it damage? I mean, what is the harm of having the Fed unleashed the way they are?
Oh, look at the middle class. It's shrinking. It's been shrinking for 10 years.
But that's the Fed's fault? I don't know if we can blame that on the Fed. How?
Why not?
Suggesting the Audit the Fed bill is an attempt to put the secret money printing machine in the hands of an inept Congress. Nice try, but it's not really sticking. What else could the beneficiaries of the Federal Reserve System spend those trillions of dollars on as insurance? Well, the Rothschilds, Europe's banking dynasty that profits from the Fed more than any other family on the planet, had an ace up their sleeve. They learned this lesson before they even created the Fed, when they tricked European nations into having a central bank as well. Quote, "The few who understand the system will either be so interested from its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class." End quote. So, do the Rothschilds have any politicians so interested in its profits or so dependent on its favors that can stop the audit from proceeding? Well, trillions of your dollars buys a lot of interest and a lot of favors. What do you think?
So now that Audit the Fed has passed the House, the bill will move on to the Senate, which should mean it has a good chance of passing. Why? Because Congressman Ron Paul isn't the only longtime lawmaker who has advocated auditing the Fed. This is video of Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid on January 23rd, 1995. Listen.
I have sponsored legislation that would call for an audit of the Federal Reserve System. I offer that amendment every year. Every year, the legislation gets nowhere. I think it would be interesting to know about the Federal Reserve. I think we should audit the Federal Reserve. It's taxpayers' money that's being used there, but we don't do that. Even though there is no entity in the world that controls our lives more than the Federal Reserve System.
And that again was Senator Reid in 1995, the same Harry Reid who is now the Senate Majority Leader. Getting a vote on Audit the Fed should be a slam dunk, right? Well, apparently not. The Senate Majority Leader has said that he will not put it up for an up or down vote, making it dead on arrival. Well, can he do that? He can. In the U.S. Senate, legislation is placed on the legislative calendar. Scheduling of that calendar is the job of the Majority Leader. Bills, though, can be brought to the floor whenever a majority of the Senate chooses. So why would Senator Harry Reid, who in 1995, as you just saw, said that every year he pushes for an audit of the Federal Reserve System, now say no? Again, the clip we showed you was in 1995. It was made 17 years ago, so maybe he's changed his mind. Then again, maybe not. This is Senator Reid in 2010 while trying to hold on to a Senate seat in Nevada.
I called for a Federal Reserve audit in 1987, I'm sorry. So I agree with my opponent on that. There should be a Federal Reserve audit. We haven't gotten it yet. But we've made some progress in that regard.
So what you need to know is what many Americans should want to know. How does the majority leader in the Senate argue, in his words, since 1987, that the Federal Reserve should be audited? And then when a bill that he's been asking for 25 years finally heads into his chamber, he says he won't allow it to get an up or down vote. I called the senator's office today, asking him to explain how that happens. I'm still waiting.
So what can you do? Well, if you think giving the richest people on the planet a secret money printing machine is a good idea, grab a few dollars while they still have purchasing power, buy yourself a rope, and find a tall tree. If you think it's a bad idea, first, like and thumbs up this video and then share it via email, Twitter, Facebook, and any other way possible. Second, send Senator Harry Reid an email and let him know what you think he should do. You can do that at www.reid.senate.gov/contact. And if you think giving bankers a secret money printing machine is a bad idea and fail to take any action at all, then trade that rope for barbed wire and go find that tree, because laziness is worse than stupidity. That's all I have time for today, folks. I want to thank everyone for the awesome comments we've received on our last video. It seems the indoctrination occurring on college campuses is something a lot of you have witnessed firsthand. In my next video, I'm going to shatter the myth of the left-right political spectrum. I'll introduce a fun new tool to you. You can take a quiz and compare yourself to Gandhi, Hitler, Obama, Romney, Stalin, Friedman, and many others. Be warned, you might not like what you stand for when you're finished. See you then.